Hello again. This is video number 5 of my video series entitled Genocide in the Bible. I'm going to pick up where I left off in the last video, and if you haven't seen the previous videos, I encourage you to do so now. In the last video, I was discussing a pattern in regards to God's judgment in the Old Testament. I discussed the pattern that we see, or the parallels we see between the flood of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah, and I want to look at a third case that I believe parallels those two cases. And that is what I call the Amalekite initiative found in 1 Samuel 15. Now, the Amalekite initiative looks like an ordered annihilation. The one difference between what happens to the Amalekites and what happens with the people during the flood of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah is that those two previous cases, the annihilations were the results of natural occurrences of some kind, or natural disasters of some kind, whereas this one is the result of an ordered annihilation. In other words, there's a human agency involved in the judgment. Now, the situation is this. The Amalekites are a predatory raiding and nomadic group and are descendants of Esau. They would have been aware of the promise of the land to Israel from early promises to Esau's twin, Jacob. The Amalekites did not live in Canaan. They were very much like the Kenites, but they didn't live in Canaan, but in a lower desert part of Negev, a region south of where Judah would eventually settle, and would not have been threatened by Israel had they believed in the promises of God. And point 4, as soon as Israel escapes Egypt during the Exodus, before they can even catch their breath, the Amalekites make a long journey south and attack Israel. This can be read in Deuteronomy chapter 25. What's interesting about their attack on the Amalekites' attack on Israel is that their first targets are the helpless. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 17 through 19. This starts a long chain of events that continue for a period of 200 to 400 years, in which the Amalekites raid, terrorize, and oppress Israel. And it leads us to this case here in 1 Samuel 15, where Saul is ordered to attack the Amalekites. Now, before the attack on Amalek is initiated by Israel, the innocent are told to move away. 1 Samuel 15, verse 5. This action would have served to give the people of Amalek plenty of notice, or time to move themselves away. And the impending attack by Saul, especially with the troop counts reported, would have hardly been a surprise. Some of them would have likely have fled. We know all of them were not killed, since they lived to fight and raid again in David's time, 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 30, and even in Hezekiah's time, 200 to 300 years later, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 43. Now, before we get to this episode in 1 Samuel 15, it's important to note that back in Deuteronomy chapter 25, Amalek's assault on Israel drew the anger of God for two reasons. Number one, the Amalekites failed to recognize that the hand and plan of God in Israel's life and destiny. Even the farther removed Canaanites of Jericho had been given plenty to think about when they heard about the Exodus, according to Joshua chapter 2, verse 10. And number two, the Amalekites' first targets of their warfare were typically the sick, the aged, and the tired of Israel. Again, take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 17 through 19. As I stated, what takes place in the Exodus, or right after the Exodus that we read about in Deuteronomy chapter 25, starts a chain of events that continues all the way through the reign of Saul. So the Amalekites continue to repeatedly oppress, terrorize, and vandalize Israel between 200 to 400 years or more. And yet the Amalekites are freely accepted as immigrants to Israel during this period. So quickly, the point I want to make is that the pattern of judgment or annihilation that's ordered on the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15 fit the exact same pattern that we see with the flood of Noah and with Sodom and Gomorrah. And again, I'm going to give more specifics or details later in some upcoming videos. But for now, let's note again. Number one, the Amalekites had plenty of access to truth, at least 400 years since the time of Jacob and the land promise, plus enough information about the Exodus to know where and to when to attack Israel. Point 2, even their warfare conduct was cruel by ancient Near Eastern standards. They were known for attacking the sick, the aged, and so on, children. Point 3, the semi-annihilation was a judgment. Point 4, God was willing to spare the innocent people and especially gave them the opportunity to move away. Remember 1 Samuel 15, chapter 15, verse 5. Point 5, the children living in the household of the hostile parents, those who refused to flee or join Israel, died swiftly in a one-day event. And basically the children are victims of their fathers or parents' terrorist and oppressive habits towards Israel. Point 6, the innocent members of the community, the Kenites, and any change of heart Amalekites who fled are delivered along with their children and their household. Okay. Now, in each of these three cases, the two I talked about in the last video, in this case here, the people involved do not change their behavior. They do not change their evil ways or their violent ways towards other people. Let's take an opportunity to look at one group of people who did, and that's the anti-example of Nineveh, found in the book of Jonah. In the book of Jonah, we have an averted annihilation. And if you haven't read the book of Jonah, you might want to take a look at it. A couple points here real quick. The wickedness of the city is great, prompts God to intervene. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. God sends Jonah, point 2, God sends Jonah to pronounce what looks like an unconditional prophecy. Point 3, instead of turning a deaf ear like the other cases where warnings were sent, these people, the people of Nineveh, change direction. They have a change of heart. They change their ways. Jonah chapter 3, verses 5 through 9. Now, if you look at that passage, you should notice that the questionable behavior of Nineveh included violence. Verse 8. Verse 8 says, "Let them give up their evil ways and their violence." So their crimes here in Nineveh are very similar to the crimes of the people of Noah's day, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Amalekites. But the difference is they change. Once they get the message, they change their ways. And God responds to this attitude adjustment in grace. Jonah chapter 3, verse 10. When God saw that what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he had compassion and did not bring upon them destruction that he had threatened. Notice that all during the judgment time, God was still concerned for Nineveh. Jonah chapter 4, verse 10. So God would prefer to show compassion. That's the point of the book of Jonah. So in this anti-example, you have a group of people confronted with truth and warning, which in response respond with a change of attitude, abandon their evil ways and their violence towards others, and as a result avert annihilation. Now, I've gone through these 4 different examples to demonstrate that there's an obvious pattern here. The obvious pattern is this. The annihilations in the Old Testament are judgments. These judgments are for publicly recognized cruelty and violence of an extreme and widespread nature. Point 3, these judgments are preceded by long periods of warnings and exposure to truth. And when there's changes of attitudes, there's a change of outcome. That's the example in the book of Jonah. When there's not a change in attitude or a change in ways, the judgment takes place. Point 4, innocent adults are given a way out. Point 5, household members share in the fortunes of their parents, both good and ill. And point 6, somebody always escapes. Lot escaped Sodom and Gomorrah. Noah escaped the flood of Noah. And the Kenites escaped the judgment on the Amalekites. I should point out right now that these are exceptional cases, and there are actually very, very few of these in the Old Testament. Now, the obvious question comes up here. Do we have any evidence that the annihilation of the Canaanites, found in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua, fall into the pattern that we have documented in these last 2 videos? Do we have any reason to believe that the Canaanites were an exceptional case, or that the judgment on the Canaanites was the result, or was caused by widespread violence and evil on the part of the Kenites? I'm gonna pick up with this part in my next video when I specifically start turning my attention to the Kenites found in the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua. Thanks.